Thank you so much for joining us for Unleashing Opportunity for All, a community learning series designed to advance dialogue and learning on equity and justice. I'm Frank Shaw, Chair of the Board of Directors for the YMCA of Greater Seattle. On behalf of the board, welcome to the first in our three-part community learning series. I hope that after watching the film The Most Beautiful Thing, you are as inspired and moved as I am. While incredibly inspiring, the film also showcases how systemic barriers in communities can result in unfulfilled potential. But it also showcases the beautiful humanity and resilience that can come from pure friendships, community investments, and a desire to uplift and trust others. Mother Teresa said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples." This film is an example of how one stone, one chance encounter with a boat at a school created many positive ripples in the lives of young men on the west side of Chicago. Today is our opportunity to create our own ripples, to learn, activate, and advance in our journey to disrupt systemic racism, inequities in our community for a better us. Today will be led through a thought-provoking conversation about the film and systemic barriers encountered in the life of Arshay Cooper and several other community leaders. Leading that discussion will be Loria Yeadon, President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater Seattle. Much like Arshay, Loria knows the experience of being the first. In 2019, Loria was named the first woman and first person of color to helm this association in its 144-year history, and is just one of 10 black women CEOs leading Ys across the country, and was recently nominated as a 2020 Female Founders Alliance champion. Please enjoy this series and the dialogue tonight, and thank you for taking this journey.
Did we fall or were we on?
Thank you, Frank Shaw. We so appreciate your leadership, and I appreciate the very kind introduction this afternoon. I'm Loria Yeadon, the President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater Seattle, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the YMCA of Greater Seattle's board and staff, welcome to Unleashing Potential for All, a most beautiful thing. We're so glad you're here to learn, grow, and make progress with us together. This afternoon, I begin by acknowledging that many of us in attendance today in the Seattle area rest on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people from time immemorial. And in this moment, we pause to give deference to the original stewards of these lands, past, present, and future. In this moment in our history, welcoming spaces where we can gather and acknowledge, learn, heal, and build a community of equity and justice for all is so very important, more important than ever. The Y is honored to convene and hold this space for community today. Also, learning from those with learned experiences is critically important to understand the trauma, challenges, and barriers that must be identified, unpacked, and addressed to disrupt systemic racism. Today, we will learn together. During our time together, we will tackle systemic racism and inequities in a panel discussion with Arshay Cooper, the captain of the rowing team in the film that hopefully you all had the opportunity to watch. And he's also the author of the highly acclaimed book, A Most Beautiful Thing. After our discussion with Arshay, we're gonna take a quick active break, and then we'll welcome three local panelists, Sean Good, Sarah Lopez, Ty McMillan, our three local panelists, who will help us take a closer look at systemic racism in our own region. After the panel discussion, stay with us, because we'll share what's coming up next in our learning series, including the opportunity to continue the dialogue today in a facilitated community breakout session that's going to immediately follow our panel discussion. So stay tuned. Later in the program, we'll give you more details. So now a bit about this series. Unleashing Potential for All is a community learning series anchored by the YMCA of Greater Seattle for sharing knowledge to delayer and deconstruct racism, discover unheard voices, and activate collaborative communities. Through our collective work, we endeavor to create the generational change of equity and justice for all that we pledge to our children, our community, and each other. We're committed to removing institutional and systemic barriers that result in oppression and racism, especially in Black and other marginalized youth, families, and communities. As an organization born in 1876, the YMCA of Greater Seattle's history has reflected our nation's history. And that includes our successes, our failures, and our learnings. We recognize that we are not immune from systemic racism impacting us all as individuals and as organizations. The YMCA of Greater Seattle has embarked on a journey to look even more closely at ourselves, our practices, programs, and lines of service. With the humility, grace, and accountability, we are committed to rooting out racist and inequitable systems in our own organization, wherever they may be. This is the hard work that must be done by us all to disrupt and ultimately end racism. We invite you to do this hard work alongside of us and to join us in learning and building a more inclusive community so that everyone, especially the young, can be unleashed and develop to their fullest potential in spirit, mind, and body. We're so honored today to have a community of collaborators join us in this work. The Unleashing Potential for All Learning Collective is a group of community members, nonprofit partners, businesses, foundations, government agencies, and otherwise locally and nationally that are aligned in advancing community conversations and catalyzing meaningful action to achieve equity and justice for all. We are grateful for our collective to stand together today. We are also grateful for our learning partners, whose generous financial support is making this learning series accessible to all. Our learning partners include Bill and Paula Clapp, 300 Degrees, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Casey Family Programs, Imagine Housing, PACCAR Parts Diversity, the George Pocock Rowing Foundation, Perkins Coie, REI, Windermere Foundation. So we thank those learning partners. I'd like to extend a special thanks to our executive producer learning partner. First, the Satterberg Foundation, which is out front and convening community to advance equity in our community. Thank you to the Satterberg Foundation for your work, for your awesome equity statement, and for your partnership. Our next executive producer learning partner is the Laird Norton Company. So I ask each of you to please join us now in listening to a special message from the Laird Norton Company, which reminds us how important it is to unite in community.
For 165 years, Laird Norton has known that we are stronger together.
As one of America's oldest family-owned companies,
we have always partnered with others
to enrich the communities in which we work and live.
These values are even more important now.
So across our enterprise, we're joining community partners to give back.
Because at Laird Norton, we know we are all stronger together.
We all know we got to believe in something.
Okay. So again, many thanks to Laird Norton, the Statterberg Foundation, and our circle of learning partners for standing with us and investing with us in this work to elevate these conversations and advance equity and justice for all. Today, we hope that the story from A Most Beautiful Thing can launch us into a deeper conversation about systemic barriers rooted in racism that have undermined the lives of youth, families, and communities for generations. We're so fortunate and honored to have Arshay, who will share his story, has shared his story through the film and through his book, and it's important for him to be the centerpiece of this conversation today. It is our hope that the conversation won't stop here today, but instead we hope that this conversation will compel us towards even more conversation with our neighbors, our friends, and our family. So this is the internal work that each of us will have to do. We also hope that you'll join us on August 26th and September 16th for 2 additional parts of our learning series. And same time is 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific as we continue with this community learning series. So as we begin our panel discussion this afternoon, it's important to provide some general context to systemic racism. The most recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Manuel Ellis, and so many others, locally and nationally, have propelled our nation into a deep conversation about systemic racism. The twin pandemics of racism and COVID-19 have once again exposed the disparate impacts of over 400 years of oppression being experienced by Black and other marginalized communities in our country. However, when we talk about racism, we often think about individual, isolated acts of racism, instead of probing more deeply and addressing the roots of racism embedded in systems that are more complex and difficult to identify and disrupt. So before we dive into the conversation with Arshay and our other panelists, let's watch a short video to get grounded together in a basic understanding of systemic racism.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace. This is Jamal. Jamal?
Okay, thank you, Jamal. So this short video is purposefully pretty basic and unnuanced, just to help us get better grounded in what systemic racism is and to establish a shared vocabulary of the core meaning of systemic racism. Of course, there are nuances that we will perhaps unpack in a bit during our panel discussion. But as we reflect on the short film and the systems at play in A Most Beautiful Thing, we see many systems at work in education, lending, wealth, incarceration, addiction, gangs, sexual abuse, and violence, just to name a few. These systems cause barriers to equity and justice in the west side of Chicago for Preston, Maxwell, Arvin, and Arshay. But there are younger versions of these men in every city across our nation, including Seattle. A different time, a different city, but the same systemic barriers rooted in racism. As we move through our conversation this afternoon, let's think deeply about the systems and barriers that are stalling the potential of young people in our own backyards and communities, and challenge ourselves to think about our role as a community in disrupting and dismantling those systems, and in the process, unleashing potential for all. We realize that while this conversation is necessary to make progress, we also recognize that these are tough conversations that could be triggering for some who have lived traumatic experiences. We want everyone to be well cared for during this session. So if you need additional support, we have licensed therapists and support services from our Social Impact Center at the Y of Greater Seattle, who are on standby and available to support anyone who may need our support. The contact information is shown on the screen now and will also be posted in the chat box. Okay, so with that framing, let's get after it. I am honored to welcome the captain of the first all-Black male rowing team and the writer of the book and central character of the highly acclaimed film, A Most Beautiful Thing. Everyone, please join me in giving a virtual applause, perhaps in the chat box, to Arshay Cooper.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Arshay.
Hey, thank you. I'm so honored to be here and with the Greater Seattle family and the 459 plus people that's involved who saw the film. So I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. We are honored to have you. And we are grateful that you made the decision to share your story so we can learn. So thank you for being here with us. You have a powerful and at times difficult story to witness. There's so much we can discuss. But I'd love to just start by asking you to paint the picture for us of what it was like growing up in the West Side of Chicago.
Yeah, it was in the 90s. Growing up in the 90s in Chicago was difficult in many different ways. First, my mother was a drug addict, and I've never said the word dad a day in my life, and my brothers were in gangs. And when you walk outside of your apartment in Chicago, you don't know why you live in these conditions, but you do. And there are many abandoned buildings and so many gangs, right? You have seen in the film that the guy started off by saying, I was 9, I was 11, I was 10 when I first seen someone killed or shot on the streets of Chicago. I have skipped over pools of blood. I have lost friends. I have ran for my life. I have walked with my grandmother and see bullets fly past our head. We have witnessed what most soldiers have witnessed in war, but before we were 14 years old. And there was no treatment for that. There was no social workers for that. And I will say to myself that God exists everywhere but here. And so not only that, you have to walk through different gangs to get to school. And all these gangs are young people who basically on the street trying to survive. That when there is no organization to go to, when they did close some of the community centers and all these young people on the street, the gang will come to you and say, hey, do you need a pair of shoes? Do you need something to wear? I'll take care of you. And you make a choice that anyone would make to eat, to survive. And that was every day in Chicago. And you walk into a school where everyone looks like you and you have 10 to 12 different gangs in the school and you have to be a tough guy, right? You have to watch your back. And it is, and that was tough for me and my brothers on the team. And to see those that are your parents or your parents' friends that are addicted or are in jail and still not knowing why was the question that we had every day. And that was, the picture of West Side of Chicago. And not only the disconnect is with you and the guys in different community, but also with those who serve and protect.
Yeah. So
the only person you have is yourself, and not really trusting your friends because at any minute they can join another gang for better protection. And then you're no longer friends. And so with that in your mind and that in your brain, I can say that is why the big question was what college you was going to join. The bigger question was what gang you're going to join, and that was Chicago.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. laid out a lot about the environment that you grew up in and some of the systems that were at play, some of the systems that maybe you were born into. Can you say more about how the environment impacts opportunities and choices? You mentioned, bad decisions versus bad choices. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, I think first I want to say that whenever there's a mass shooting in a suburban school, right away they send in trauma counselors because they want to change what they saw. And so they can go back to school and maybe go back to normal, undo what they saw. And we experience it every day. And there was one social worker in a school of 1,000 students. And so when you see that kind of violence, right, that your brothers in gangs, or maybe your mother can't find a job, or your dad can't find a job because he was locked up because of mass incarceration, you go to school, it affects your ability to think into the future. That you go to school and you would think you're not smart, or even someone will say you're dumb, or you can't pass the test, right, to get into the college you want to go to because you're worried. How can I focus on who really discovered America, or what's 20% of half when my mother didn't come home for 2 days? Or how can I learn when I'm starving? Or how can I pass the test when the guys told me they was gonna jump me after school? And there's no one to talk to. There's no one to share these things with. And so that affected our education, the way we learned, the way we took care of others, right? And that trauma was not just my trauma, right? When I asked my mom about this, she suffered the same trauma. She couldn't learn because of her grandfather, what he went through. See, our grandfather saw his best friend hung on a tree. So as Malcolm's mother saw her brother hung on a tree in the South. And they couldn't undo what they saw. And that pain and trauma that they felt, that they dealt with, and they couldn't seek help for it, they redistribute some of that pain and trauma to their next generation. And so that's what you see in these neighborhoods. That's what you're in these cities. So it affect our decision to just write the right answer in a test box, or to make a decision to go to a job that we just were hired for, but it's in a different neighborhood and I can't go over there. So you can't protect your family because of the community you live in. And so that's how it affects these decisions that are happening, these opportunities in our community.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that. You know, Craig Nash says, you can't be what you can't see. And I wondered if you would just talk a little bit about the importance of representation, being able to see what you can be, especially marginalized communities.
Yeah, where I live and what I saw was what I explained, and I didn't think outside of that. But I remember watching TV and watching shows like A Different World, Family Matters, and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and seeing people who look just like me, with successful lives, and that are professors, that are smart, who spoke well, who got allowance, who live in big houses. And that's when I realized, wow, like seeing someone who looked like me, like I can do that. Like I can go to college, right? The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it taught me that even without a father, you can still have a real joy. But why don't we have that, right? And so I started to, if you read my book, at 14, 15 years old, when my mom came home from her recovery, I started reading books and starting to learn things about history and athletes and people like Jackie Robinson and Anita DeFrance, all these folks who look just like me. And I started studying that, and I realized that it's so important that when you have someone who look like you, when you have someone that's successful, when someone come back to you and say, hey, listen, I was born to be an eagle just like you. We look the same. You were born to fly. You were born with a lot of strength, with the ability to see the future. And when someone came to my school, and when they brought in these motivational speakers that said all the places they visit and the college they went to, I was like, wow, like, yeah, I can do that. And, you know, and that's why I believe in also the importance of media representation, right? Before George Floyd was murdered, to be honest, we didn't get a lot of media love about this film. But once this happened and people are no longer in denial, they start amplifying Black voices. And everyone from Men's Health to Wall Street Journal to Black Enterprise, everyone covered this story. And this weekend, the film came out, and I can't tell you, Gloria, the amount of messages I got from Black fathers and young Black men that said, I actually talked to my son about rowing, but when he saw the film, they made a decision to check out the sport, to row. You gave my son hope through that screen. And I remember that first hope that I got by watching A Different World, that saying I can do that. And so representation is so important. And that's why it's so important when it comes to the corporate world, where they would tell you, well, corporate world, a job where there's mostly white men, where they would say, recommend someone to work for us, and their group are white men. And there's still no representation of us. Or you have a corporation that want interns, but people who look like me, who goes to college, have to work, have to still help my mom pay bills, so I can't intern. And so those who don't have to pay for college are interning, and they funnel right into the corporation. So when we start thinking about these things, we start understanding why there's not a big representation in many different fields. And so representation matters.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. I want to go back to something you said about your mom and how there were days she didn't come home. And I remember in the film and in the book, I enjoyed both so much. It was just so illuminating to me. But when you talk about trust and your mom not coming home had an impact on your ability to trust. Could you say more about that?
Yeah.
And how that changed when, or how it impacted your rebuilding of your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, I think trust, even when I think about my mom or I think about my team, it's just not being together, but it's when you have an ally, someone who advocates for you. And when she came home, I mean, just the way she advocated for us and told us how great we are. And when she came home at my 8th grade graduation, and she told me that my gift will make room for me, put me in the presence of great kings and queens. And she started speaking into my life. That's when that trust came back. It was so hard to trust anyone because, you know, again, your mother's out there and there's this addiction that she has and this trauma that she's paying for. And if you can't trust your mother, you don't trust anyone. And so you have all these young people who don't really trust a lot of people. But when I saw the hope in her eyes, when I saw her sing for the first time at Victory Outreach, is when I realized that some spiritual being spoke to me and allow me to see hope for the first time through her. And then her hope was so active, right? And so I think that's what helped me rebuild the trust, that she was so active and the change that she represented and and how she spoke life into us every day and who we gonna be, who we can be, and just being there was so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, we've been, about almost 12, 13 minutes into this conversation, and we haven't said a thing about rowing. It's interesting because, you know, at first when I saw the movie being advertised and I saw the book cover, I said, oh, this is about rowing. And once I got past the first chapter, I realized the best part of this book is not about rowing. The rowing part is fantastic, but the best part of this is not about rowing. But let's talk about rowing because, you know, being able to reach that non-traditional sport, something that wouldn't typically be accessible to a kid of color growing up on the West Side. Can you talk a little bit about how that transformed and the impact it had on the lives of you and your crewmen.
Yeah, it made a great impact. First, remember, like when I first saw rowing for the first time on that screen, no one looked like me, and I said, "Oh no," and I walked away. Like I was done. I was done. No one looked like me. And then, I talked to my friend Preston, and we talked about it, and they offered some free pizza, and we was like, okay, all right. They know we like pizza, And when I went up to the gym room, I mean, you talk about Chicago in the 90s, everyone carried a basketball to school. Everything was about Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, the Bulls. Like there's nothing else outside of it, no other sport. And you think about the money that you can have to take care of your family, the glory, the crowds, and even the cheerleaders at times. But when this guy came and talked about the power of rowing, in this sport, you race maybe once in your city, and every other race is outside of your city. So we've never been anywhere. I'm like, wow, I get to travel. And then he talked about practices downtown every day. I mean, a lot of us 15 years old, because we didn't want to go through different neighborhoods, we have never been downtown. And I wanted to see it. He talked about building a brotherhood. I only had one friend, and that was Preston. So that caught my attention. And everything that he said was everything that was missing in my life. See, I didn't have a dad. So if I could just have a coach that may fulfill some of those things. My brothers in gangs, I didn't want to do that. So if I can just join the team, I find that brotherhood. And, we didn't like each other at first. There were fights. But when we showed up at that boathouse, and we were nervous, we was uncomfortable. We shared a boathouse with 3 private schools. And, there were stares, there were looks that made us uncomfortable. And when we got in that boat and we pushed out into open water, everyone had to be a tough guy. But for the first time, we saw fear in each other. And survival mode kicked in. And what it said to all of us, to get back to this dock safely, we must pull for each other. Mm-hmm. And then in order to do that, you have to shut up and listen. And then here's the coxswain or the coach that says, sit tall, breathe. You belong here. You have a right to be here. Mm-hmm. You will win. You will succeed. Let's move together as one team, one band, one sound. And we started to do that. And to hear the blades slap across the water, to see the downtown view, to experience that healing of the magical rhythm in the boat. Some people meditate 30 minutes a day and it changed their lives, but 2 hours a day with that kind of meditation in the water and downloading serenity and not hearing the gunshots or the police sirens or the broken street glass really made an impact in our lives. And it was something that we had never felt before, and we wanted to experience every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds like the peace that you found outdoors on the water was transformational. Was it an escapism?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, it was an absolute escape. Escape. And just to, you understand when you play basketball and football and baseball in your public school, you try to get to school safe, right? You still have to watch your back. You in school 8 hours a day, and then the gym room is right there for you to practice. You run straight to the gym room, and there's a lot of noise, there's chaos, you're getting ready for practice, and then you run home to get home safe. For us, for rowing, we got on this bus to drive the hour away, right? And so at the beginning, it was quiet bus rides because we didn't know each other. But when you're there, you're stretching. And like I said, there's none of that. And it's just quiet. It was escape. And it created opportunity for dialogue, to run, to take care of ourselves. And in those trips that you would go to a regatta to race, and you're the only one that looked like you, right? Everyone at the regatta is white. The volunteers are white. The competitors are white. The coaches are white. The boats are white. And you say to yourself, we're the only ones here. We have to look out for each other. And let's sit on this grass and let's talk to each other about what we saw, how you feel about the trip. And it created these just magical opportunities, these bonds that last for so long. And it reminded me of like many, many years ago when these soldiers had fought in World War I or II, and they haven't seen each other in years, and they still had this bond because they was away from everything else. If you were white, you were black, and you was there to fight and pull for each other. And that isolation really helped us.
Yeah. So a beautiful sport that led to some beautiful outcomes for you and your crewmen who, based upon my read of it, they're like brothers to you, were so then and are still very close to you. Just wondering, and that sounded like a once in a lifetime opportunity for someone to care enough to show up to encourage you guys to get into rowing. And then to make the investment. I mean, rowing is a pretty expensive sport. What do you see as those barriers, even for those kids who know about rowing or are inclined to row? What do you see as those barriers to them actually having access to the sport?
Yeah, it's so many. First of all, people will say, "Oh, we need more people of color, no Black people rowing," or if they are rowing, how can we get them to college? How can we get them better? And I say to myself is that right now it's expensive to play soccer in our community, to be on a soccer team, and all you need is a ball. So imagine the sport of rowing where a boat's the same price as a Mercedes, right? That it is an expensive sport. We can go to the basketball court, we can take a milk crate and build on our craft every day in our community. We can take a football and learn how to tackle, a soccer ball and learn how to kick. Just hours and hours to be on our craft. Or take a stick and a baseball and learn how to play. But me, Alvin, and Malcolm, before Ken showed up at our school, couldn't just go to the Lincoln Park Boathouse and say, we want to row, we want to learn, me and my boys want to learn, and we want to one day maybe row for this country. It's like, nah, where your $300 a season at? And so it was hard to get access to the sport. And we see those same barriers today, right? That you can't afford it, and people are worried, right? When diversifying their program, because they don't even have the education. And I mean, I've been in places where I try to talk to board members in different cities about diversifying their team. And they saying, well, what if someone steals the master's team purse? I see this all the time in the sport. And I think for us, back when we were young, this one guy came and started our team, but before that, there was a lot of private school teams. And they had the best boats, they had the best coaches, they had the best funding, right? They had swim pools in their schools. And you think about the inequality of education. Like our school, if Ken never came to our school, I would have never went on any college visits. A lot of kids didn't go on any college visits. I would have never heard of the word entrepreneurship. We couldn't even take our books home because there wasn't many. And just the power of this guy who first did his research about our community, understood what we need. And the first thing he did, what I admire about this guy, this Jewish man, is that the first thing he did was showed up at our home, everybody's house, before he went to the team, and met our mothers and our fathers. And he asked questions. What do you need? And that was powerful. And because he understood that you can't just work with the kid, but you have to work with the family.
Right.
And that was special. And so that's how we created this awesome team. And there's still some of these barriers that exist today. And I think it's mostly the financials of the reasons why we can't put that Manly team or that boathouse or that program in every single school, because if we can, there would have been so many more Arshays, Malcolm Prestons, and Alvins that would have reached 1,000 more.
Yeah.
And experienced what we experienced.
Mm-hmm. Sports is so fun. I mean, and such a great outlet for kids. It's a shame that in a lot of places, finances are a barrier. Uniforms are a barrier. The travel is a barrier. So I want to get into some deeper conversation around why you decided to tell this story. What were you hoping to accomplish by sharing this story and bringing it to the big screen?
Yeah, I think it's two things. It's number one, that 20 years later, there's still young people that live in the same conditions that me, Alvin, Malcolm, and Preston lived in. And I've spoken to schools. I have led culinary classes, and young kids have all the same questions. How do I live here and be successful? I'm not a ball player. I'm not a rapper. What was your roadmap? How do I navigate through the conditions that exist on the west side of Chicago still? And I wanted to tell my way and how the sport of rowing was my way and the other guys. Number two, when you notice in the film, Pooh, when we sit in the barbershop, Pooh said, when they tore down the YMCA, I ran to the streets. Yeah. I remember that YMCA, Gloria. It was on Kedzie Avenue, and there was about 150 kids that would go there. And that's where we found the counselor, the coaches, the mentors. Yeah. And it had no resources. And they closed down. So here's 150 kids in the neighborhood, in the streets, and that 4 or 6 o'clock time. That 4 or 6 o'clock time is a very important time in our society. That's the time that's a high risk for teenage pregnancy, risky behavior, joining gangs, being jumped, right? And you have all these young people there. And then when rowing came, Pooh ran to the team.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show the importance that all these young and resilient and amazing, talented young people on the west side of Chicago who learn how to survive, that talent is equally distributed, but it's access and opportunity that it's not.
Yeah.
And when we can give that access, if we can, we inherit these things from Jim Crow laws and all these systemic problems and violence and things like that. But there's also people who, like Ken, who realize that I have benefited, right? And the importance of giving opportunities to these communities that's in need. And so I really wanted to share that story in that way.
Well, we're better because you're sharing the story and you're giving us an opportunity to think about it more deeply with you and then ask ourselves, what's our opportunity, right? To help unleash the potential of kids. What can we do? So, our 30 minutes has just flown by, but I'm getting a signal that we should take our active break now. So we so appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your journey with us. We're going to take the active break, and then we're going to have a few local panelists join us for more discussion and learning. So I hope that everyone is learning with us and is learning as much as I am in this moment with Arshay. So take the quick health break if you need to take one. But for those of you who want to stay online while we take this active break, we're going to run some film to give you some information about the YMCA of Greater Seattle's Social Impact Center that provides shelter and wraparound services for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness, and so much more that we provide through this business unit. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Rotation as you live up in the upper left, you gotta have patience, cause ain't no urban radio stations about to play us unless you sign a data to make your songs brainless. While you waiting for the mention in the pages of the stranger, you can find me in the basement making heaters for later. And yes, we all need a little paper to strive, but the monsters in your town will put a limp in your stride. I exhibit all the time like I'm pimping your ride, and we've been living in conditions we're tired of. Come on, rise up. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, lost but not forgotten. We kicking the doors open. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, moving in slow motion. It's that Northwest classic. 98118, the alphabetically second to last state, never finish in last place like the Mariners for 3 years straight. For prescriptions we administer the medicine for people still afflicted with acute 2-0 sickness. We exist between the gold and the green. I paint the soul of the scene under towers of power, dodging the overfiend daily, causing the bones to decay. But they say we're so far away, we couldn't possibly make it. I've seen modesty fake, an awful lot of hate, but none of which was sent to my face. I confide inside my circle with a fire made of purple. I'm a rider for the art, I keep it sharp and with rehearsal. The worst is when they mark us to target a market that we're not even a part of. If your CDs and Target means you got distribution, but we still pushing units with our own tool, homegrown since you thought you knew. Yeah. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We're broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, lost but not forgotten. We're kicking the doors open. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We're broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, moving in slow motion. It's that Northwest classic. And they say desegregation was a big step forward, but integration only covered up a rotten core. The surface might have changed, but the cauldron is still hot. Now we more politically correct with less real talk. They say we liberal, but literally not, when the cops bend us over while upholding the law. Despite the sight of coffee shops on every single block nearby, and supply and demand for the rock. It's two types of crack, one legal, one felonious. The lumping pro push keys like felonious. The corporation pushing blood with the beans. I heard people moving up here for the love of the green. New homes, new stores, still a hood underneath. No good, how we chilling in the gut of the beast. The national question, with no answer in the least. It's no rest until the cancer meets the feed. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We're broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, lost but not forgotten. We kicking the doors open. Two scholars rock fresh, north by northwest, and it's still no rest, cause we're not finished yet. We're broke but not broken, cold but not frozen, moving in slow motion. It's that Northwest classic.
Yeah, 18 years old, outside in the cold, but where I wasn't better than the stormy weather. Thought I was alone till I found a new home, and what I was given I'll treasure. Nothing else can measure. I found a place that told me I could stand on my own, make something for myself, and it was always inside me all along. Now I'm spreading the good, and I thank you for all of your help. And it's still raining, but I can't feel it no more, since you opened your door for me. And it's still pouring, but I'm safe in my bed, cause I got a roof on my head. Finally, I can sleep. You gave me peace. Thank you for what you given me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for what you given me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for what you given me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for what you given me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for what you given me. Thank you for believing in me. Finally, I can sleep. You gave me peace.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're excited to continue our real and raw conversation. I so enjoyed that time with Arshay. And now we're going to welcome a few local community leaders who will be joining Arshay and myself as we continue to unpack the barriers we face. But this time we're going to focus more about the barriers in our local Seattle, King County community. So please join us in welcoming Sarah Lopez, Sean Good, and Ty McMillan to our panel. I think we're all here. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start out by asking Sean, Sarah, and Ty, in that order, to introduce themselves. And when you introduce yourself, please share some of the themes and barriers that you observed in the film and how they're prevalent even in our region right here in Seattle. So Sean?
Sure. Thank you, Loria, and hello to my YMCA family. Great to be present with all of you. My name is Sean Good. I'm married to the most amazing woman in the world. I'm the father of 2 incredibly gifted teenagers, and I steward a nonprofit in the King County community called Choose 180, where we work to transform systems, communities, and lives through the power of choice by partnering with institutional leaders to change the way they do justice and supporting the young people that are impacted by those systems of injustice. And watching the film is eye-opening, and it's a reminder that in King County, we have 6% African Americans. And in the city of Seattle, the Black, Indigenous, people of color population is only 36%. And so the disparities are that much more pronounced when there's such a few number of people who are suffering disproportionately throughout our community. And that was one thing that truly resonated with me. When you look at our graduation rate for Black, Indigenous, people of color in the city of Seattle, in Seattle public schools, it hovers around 70%. And 72% of the youth that were charged for crimes in our community last year were Black, Indigenous, people of color. So you just take a moment to marinate on that, and you can see that even with the smaller population of Black, Indigenous, people of color, the disparities are still present throughout our community. Thank you so much again for allowing me to share space.
And thank you for being here, Sean. And I'm pleased to claim Sean is one of ours. Longtime white person, and we're so impressed with the work you're doing now, so thank you.
It's an honor.
So Sarah?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Sarah Lopez, and I work at the University of Washington's Center for Leadership and Athletics, and we really work at that intersection of education and sport. And I'm also involved in the sport of rowing, and know Arshay through that arena as a board member on the George Pocock Rowing Foundation. So the story certainly rings true, I think, in terms of what I've seen through the sport of rowing, but also through the work that we've done at the center. We were able to do a landscape analysis of Seattle King County, and which we wrapped up in 2019, and it was called A State of Play. And what we found were so many of these same barriers that Arshay shows us and really highlights in the movie. We have a disproportionate number of both young people of color as well as young people who, for whom English is their second language, who really lag behind in terms of access and inclusion in just having access to parks, access to sport programs, being engaged in their school sports programs, and everything else that we know is so valuable for young people. So that theme certainly comes, true right here in our own community. In addition to that, and I think through our work at the George Pocock Rowing Foundation, what we've learned is that it takes more than just one person trying to invite people from the BIPOC community to join in a sport they've never been exposed to. We need to do the hard work of looking at our sport organizations and trying to figure out what are those practices, those habits, what we might call traditions, that actually keep people away, that don't allow them to see themselves as a member of our sport, that maybe provide barriers that we didn't even think about. We've mentioned some: transportation, paying for uniforms, paying for participant fees, but also there's what happens when you step into a place that's new and different. Are you really embraced? Are you allowed to bring yourself? And those are the things that I think allow young people to get engaged in sport and stay engaged and build, as Arshay's described, some healthy lifelong habits that mean so much to their lives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so Ty?
Hi there, everybody. My name is Ty Anthony McMillan, and I'm repping South King County, having been born and raised in Skyway. I'm currently a rising junior at Stanford University, and I plan on majoring in environmental systems engineering. But having grown up African American and half Filipino, my upbringing was a blend of those two different identities, and I had to navigate that, which was difficult in many ways. Nonetheless, being a Black man and having to grow up in this world, I had to grow up and navigate with caution. My dad made sure that was something instilled in me and my brother, as my father's the one who's slave descended African American. In terms of the work I've done, I've worked in different capacities to address the injustice and inequality facing young men and women of color. In my community, I've worked with organizations like Northwest Tap Connection, which is a race and social justice oriented dance studio based in Rainier Beach, Seattle, doing wonderful work, sharing narratives of Black culture and Black history, as well as bringing Black and brown youth off the streets and doing something beautiful, doing art, sharing their wonderful talents of dance, music, and culture with so many people internationally and nationally. I've also done work with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, bringing awareness of these issues and doing education consulting and guiding educators and administrators on how they can better serve their students of color. In terms of my aspirations in the future with an environmental systems engineering background, I hope, very lofty goals, but I hope to do a lot of transformative work in community infrastructure and guiding people towards more sustainable lifestyles and really emphasizing on the communities of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, to reinstill that loving nature and symbiotic relationship with our environment, to ultimately cultivate a more holistic, healthy lifestyle.
Thank you, Ty. So I want to get down and dirty, guys. We hear the statistics. We hear the barriers. We see the lack of representation. Can we go deeper into why? And after we answer that, we're going to ask why again. We want to really unpack it. So Sean, I'm going back to you. And then Arshay, I want to loop you back into this conversation.
Well, I mean, the simple why is 400 years of white supremacy and a history of racism that's embedded in every single aspect of our community. I mean, from law enforcement originating from slave patrols to an educational system that was never tailored for Black and brown communities, that's historically been centered in whiteness and has barriers embedded in it to keep Black and brown folks from excelling and superseding that of the majority. Like, there's so many reasons why we're still having this conversation. I can speak explicitly in the King County and really Washington, is that there's so many people that there's such a small percentage of African Americans and Black Indigenous people of color that we can kind of get lost in the midst of it all and people not have a chance to interact with somebody who is representative of those communities and feel that the narratives that are attached to people like that are outliers, when in reality, you may know an exception, but the rule still permeates throughout every vital element of our community, whether it's the disparities that are present in our educational system, economically, healthcare. We've watched with COVID how it's dramatically impacted Black, Indigenous, people of color communities over white folks, and it does not end, and it has no end, and it will not end until the white folks who live in the spaces that were possessed by Indigenous people choose to step up and step out and say that we will make reparation for what it is that we've done and begin to divest from our capitalistic ways and invest in community-based organizations that are being led and grounded in the needs of the Black and brown community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sean, you're the head of the ED of a small nonprofit organization. And look, Ty, he's come out of South King County and he's a student at Stanford. Why is there a problem?
Yeah.
We talk about these, centuries of racism and what have you, but we have people who in so many terms have made it. Why is there still a problem?
Yeah, well, for a couple of things. Number one, Ty coming from South King County is significant because there's a lot of great things that come from South King County, Ty, just like me, brother, you and me both, South King County to the day that I die. I digress. But to answer the question, both Ty and I, our stories aren't stories of reliance on self and the ability to pull ourselves up from the bootstrap and just be successful. Our stories are narratives that have a ton of people surrounding us. I remember when I was working at the front desk of a medical center, I interviewed at the Metro Center YMCA, and Allison Weary at that time hired me to do a job that I really wasn't on paper qualified for and told me I had 90 days to prove it, and I was at the Y for a little over 7 years. It's because there was a Black woman in that role that saw me as a Black man with possibility and not stigmatized as a problem because what I wasn't qualified for on paper. I am not a story that's a story based upon my own personal successes. My story has many chapters and many authors, and I'm grateful for everybody that's penned any piece of this book that I'm having the opportunity to live. And I know Ty can speak to the same thing. We aren't exceptional. The people who have spoken into our lives and believed in us are exceptional because they're not the norm. Because for many Black and brown young people, people see them as problems to be solved and not possibilities to be developed. And we have to shift that paradigm. Black and brown children are not problems. The systems that they're embedded in that continue to underserve them, those are problems. Black and brown children are possibilities. And if we resource the development of those possibilities, imagine the world that we could live in together.
Thank you, Sean. Arshay, coming to you.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Sean said, I think about my stepfather, Ike, who I wrote about in the book. The man was a hustler. Like, he couldn't get a job because he was locked up. But when he got out of jail, he couldn't find a job. But he had all these people in the neighborhood working for him, and he was able to make money. And I remember Ken saying, our coach, now if that guy's a trader, he's a leader, he take risks, he understands his community, he would flourish. And I want to give him an opportunity. And I think when I looked at Ike's past, his dad was a Black Panther in Chicago. A lot of those Black Panthers were locked up, right? They were thrown in jail. And he tells the story of when his dad got out, the factory that he worked for, the guy was like, you was a part of that movement, you can't work here, and I'll make sure you won't work anywhere else, right? So there's a history behind these things, right? And because of that, I couldn't find a job, and the only thing that was around was the liquor stores. He built so many liquor stores in our community, and that's what he turned to, and he didn't have opportunity, right? And so what we see in Chicago was a lack of a lot of fathers as a result of the movement of marching and standing strong and thrown in jail and all these things happening to their life that caused all this trauma. And then you have a generation of young people who fathers wasn't, and they're the ones that were holding down this community for everyone, trying to make, but it wasn't enough, right? But I agree with Sean was saying that we have to understand the history behind these things, and you guys are killing it by bringing this information to the world to show that we need allies, we need advocates, right? I always tell my friends, I don't need people that's not racist. I need people that's anti-racist, right? It's going to stand up and say enough is enough and recognize their privilege and tell their parents and their parents and some who are sitting in Congress that we have to disrupt the system, right? And I think that's amplifying Black voices. Right? There's so many more Arshay stories. There's so many Ty stories out there. There's so many Sean stories out there, and bringing them to the world. But understanding also that we have to put more of this information and into the world so people can recognize, just like that video said, that their privilege and their bias and stand up against injustice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I could speak on what Sean was saying, what Arshay was mentioning.
Please, go Ty.
That specific comment about that Sean mentioned about how we see a lot of Black and brown youth as problems, that really touched me, because that is such an institutionalized issue that really blows up into the larger issues that we see, manifesting in society. It's crazy to me to think that educators and adults writing they're closing the book on these children, saying that this is all they're going to surmount to, that this is it. They're an issue. They're disturbing in classrooms. They don't care about the education right now, and these are kids. These are kids that are, haven't even they're still teenagers, and
Yeah.
they're having their life sentence written right there for them,
Yeah.
saying that they can't surmount to anything else. It really needs to be a change of mindset and seeing, like what Sean said, that seeing these kids as opportunities, seeing the potential that they can reach, and giving them the benefit of the doubt. They're youth. They're youth. And we make mistakes all the time. Adults to this day still make mistakes. And we hope that people are merciful and people are forgiving and people are hopeful to turn the other cheek, not to turn the other cheek, but to change the mindset and to invest into these kids despite their shortcomings,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ty. Hey, follow-up question for you. Have you ever seen or witnessed a situation yourself personally where someone thought of you as a problem? Have you seen that with any other youth where that happened in your presence? If so, I'd love for you to share that and tell us how it made you feel.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is my experience of getting accepted into Stanford University and some of the comments that I received following that. It was a huge hype at my high school, given it that was a rarity, that students got accepted and admitted to top universities like Stanford. But it's not a one-time thing. We've had wonderful students in the past get into top universities. They just doesn't get mentioned, and it's a rarity, unfortunately. But what's interesting is a lot of the people asked me, they were wondering what sport I played. And to their surprise, I didn't get in as a student athlete. They immediately profiled me, thinking that I only got in due to my athletic prowess, that all Black people only get into these top universities just because they're phenomenal athletes. So that was a huge shock to me. And I always responded saying that, no, I just applied solely with my academics and with my extracurricular activities. I was an athlete in high school, but I did not get recruited to play sports to where I'm going. And a situation like that, it shows another side of this problem of institutionalized racism, kind of alluding back to that video that we saw. It's in the mindsets and the predispositions that people have, and the assumptions that they make and generalizations that they're making about our Black and brown youth. That was a very unfortunate case.
Thank you, Ty.
Gloria, I wanted to follow up because I think that brings up one of those ideas that we really need to address in terms of sport. Sport, we can say a lot of positive things about it. We see the power of it in terms of our Shea story and his, his brothers in the movie. And yet it can also be a place that makes assumptions about the worth of somebody, that can use student athletes for the wrong reason, that can exploit the very young people that are trying to be part of it. And so we need to look very closely at how we are structuring those sport experiences, how we're training coaches to think about the development of the young people they're working with, how we look at the programs and address those issues that, again, can do the wrong things for the wrong reasons, instead of thinking about how to create a place where young people belong, where they find themselves, where they learn some of those positive lessons of tenacity and persistence and dealing with failure. So sport, we talk about there's a promise of sport, but there's only a promise of sport when we do it right, when we have those people working around the young people who are looking out for them, who are embracing who they are and what they bring to our sports programs in a positive light. And there needs to be more attention to that so that we can fulfill that promise. Because otherwise, as Ty said, the assumptions we make about athletes, especially for our Black youth, can do a lot more damage than positive in terms of their experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. You're so on point. And um, it's not always intuitive to ask the next question and go to the next level to unpack that. So thank you for that, Sarah. So Arshay, I'm coming back to you. In the film and in your book, you spoke about Manly High School and the outcomes of systemic racist structures of funding public schools, like we saw in the introductory video. I'm just wondering, how does the lack of support, resources, opportunities influence these young people's path? Clearly it influenced yours. Could you help us translate that into today, what you're seeing as that influence?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think number one, we first recognized when we shared the boathouse with the private school kids that we lacked a lot. I didn't notice what we lacked until we shared the boathouse with other schools. And I think what I hear in the sport today is that, yeah, on the college level, it's good on high school level to help all these kids and bring them to the boathouse and let them experience the sport, but they're not quite fast on a college level. And it's not that they're not fast. We don't recognize the barriers, right? And the wealth gap. Number one, you have to understand that there's a lot of kids that I work with now today who can't go to practice 6 days a week because they helping their mom pay bills. They're working 3 days a week after school, right? Some of them are taking care of their sick families because the health insurance, the health insurance is just not doing it. And then there's also that these programs, right, that focus on kids are only 3 days a week. And so you have a program of kids that are rowing 3 days a week versus white kids that are rowing 6 days a week. And then they race, and all the college coaches and recruiters are looking at the boat that row 6 days a week and said they're fast. They're all the guys that we're going to put in our college. And so there's no opportunity for those of color. You also look when it comes to the wealth gap in these teams, when it comes to coaches, right? When you have resources, you hire the best coaches and the coaches that's qualifying, coaches who were in the Olympics. And then you look at the teams that don't have a lot of resources, that are mostly Black kids, who hires the master coach who loves rowing because he just have a passion for the sport, but maybe can't quite get the kids fast and not the better equipment. So there's still a lot of barriers in the sport that I am working with the Most Inclusion Fund and the Pocock Foundation to try to fix, right, to close that wealth gap. So are young people who, like us, who put in just the same amount of work, right, but don't have the same access, and is judged because they don't have access because they're described as not being fast. We're trying to solve those issues to make sure that they have equal opportunity and there's equity to get recruited in these colleges to row, hopefully one day, for this country.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Arshay. And I'm coming to you, Sean, because as we think about these gaps and we focus more on education, especially during this era of COVID-19, where there's more learning virtually than there is in the classroom. How do you see that impacting marginalized communities, marginalized youth, who may not have all of the access that's necessary in order to learn online?
Yes, right. And it's not just having like the technological things present that enable you to be able to access an online class setting on Zoom. It's, do you have space at your home set aside that allows you to do focused learning? Is there quiet space? Is there food at home that you can eat so you can functionally be in a place where you're ready to engage academically? Do you have rapport with your instructor that allows you to stay connected in a virtual setting where that instructor is seeing you as a person that you are and not just as another student that they're ushering through this curriculum to get to the other end of this thing? We know what happens, and we've seen it happen over and over and over again in our history. Those that are marginalized in the most critical moments get pushed further to the margin, unless we have an intentional effort to do otherwise that's led by people who are not those that are being marginalized. And until dominant culture says that we're going to divest from our practices and invest in alternatives that are centered in communities that are different than ours, meaning Black and brown communities, we're going to continue to rinse, wash, and repeat the same cycle of pushing people further and further away from hope, pushing people further and further away from what's possible. our organization is working really closely with Seattle Public Schools and a couple other school districts locally to help build community outside of the school space. So that way young people have other connected adults that they're connected to that then can help hold them accountable to engaging academically and show them how engaging academically can help them achieve other goals that they have present in their life that are more meaningful to them in the way that they're processing the circumstances that are in front of them. And so it's going to require a distinct partnership between dominant culture and organizations that are led by and stewarded by the people who are most impacted if we're going to get to the other side of this thing collaboratively. If otherwise, those that have always been impacted will continue to be impacted. I mean, if it has not been demonstrated in what's happened with COVID and the percentage of people from the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities who are negatively impacted and suffering and dying at such a disproportionate rate, it's the same thing across every other band. We have to begin to play a new song, but we have to do it collaboratively. If we don't do it with intentional investment from dominant culture, we'll be stuck with our same instruments that have yet to be able to harmonize in the same way to garner the attention necessary to move this thing forward and beyond the present circumstances that seem so daunting and seem so limiting.
Yes.
You know, one real thing that I think we didn't expect that COVID also brought us was actually increasing this gap that we see for equity and inclusion, especially in our communities of color. So here you have programs that are offered by school districts, programs that are offered by parks departments, and even many of our small sports organizations. They had to stop. So what happens? Well, if you can afford it, you might have gone out and bought your child a new bike, or maybe you bought a stand-up paddleboard, or maybe you found a way to still access a cabin and go hiking in the mountains. Or were you trapped in an area that doesn't have access to as many parks and open spaces to go out and play? Or are you responsible now for more things in your household where you're now taking care of siblings? And suddenly the time that you had for physical activity is being cut off. So one of the things that our King County Play Equity Coalition did was they actually put out some considerations. As we reopen, we need to think about who's getting left behind. Because the last thing we want to do is come out of the pandemic with more kids not meeting those physical activity requirements, with more kids losing touch with those programs that can connect them to the community, that can connect them with each other and to those adults that can really support them. And so it's concern right now about who's losing that chance, even in just this really small piece of their life. But that physical activity piece and that engagement is so valuable. And I think we just didn't realize that that would be another casualty of what we're dealing with COVID.
Yeah, thank you. Anything to add, Ty? I mean, COVID has wreaked havoc on college campuses. I mean, how is it affecting you? How is it affecting other youth or of color on the Stanford campus?
Yeah, the conversation of digital equity is very prominent amongst all the different universities, and addressing that, how Stanford has been addressing that, is connecting us to various resources where different organizations are offering free internet, where their financial aid is hyper focusing on where there is need. However, in terms of the broader scale, in terms of what public schools are doing, I'm not very sure. Unfortunately, a lot of universities are taking a huge toll financially, and some of them are closing down, as many of us may have heard. But really, it's a very difficult situation, and sitting in your house where you have a whole bunch of different household responsibilities. Again, like what was mentioned before, taking care of family. We're already in a time, or for many youth, they're already in a time where they're trying to figure themselves out, develop their independent skills, and for many of them, college or the opportunity to be living away from home is where they're developing that. But even for our commuter folks, it's just so difficult to focus on improving yourself and figuring out what you want to study, figuring out you're at the crux of jumping into a career or jumping into the workforce. And it definitely slows a lot of things down and blends your worlds together, being at home. And it's very difficult, and definitely a lot of more conversation need to be had about ways to improve that. And I know it's happening, but very difficult.
Yeah. So Ty, I happen to see on your LinkedIn page that you're considering a gap year. Might you be thinking about something locally?
Yes, exactly. I actually am. I am considering a gap year, and due to my own personal financial situation with school, on financial aid is not, going to be secured potentially. And just looking for the long term, I'm in no rush, and I know there's a lot of work that can be done in the community, and I want to stay locally to be able to take care of family, take care of my grandparents who are in the area, and just take it slow. And so I am looking for opportunities in the area for a potential year off, a likely and preferable year off.
Yeah, well, I hope before you leave us, you will post your LinkedIn in the chat box and a resume. There's a big Y Nation here. And I couldn't think of something more important that we would like to do than to find a way to help you in this. So please take advantage of Y Nation, okay?
Lori, awesome. I see that Jeff Rainey is already recruiting him in the chat box over there. So Ty, can I get a rep too, Ty? Can we we'll see what we can figure out between all three of us.
Yeah, Jeff is already on it. Great. Okay. Hey Arshay, can we unpack another subject that came up in the movie that I was fascinated by it. It was the connection that you and your crewmen had with the Chicago Police Department. You know, your crewmen and the police department in the same boat. So, you know, you guys decided to connect with the police department to break down these stereotypes and help them know your stories. You know, given the deeply frayed relationship between police and communities of color, I'm just wondering, how do we use this experience? How did you use your experience as an opportunity to understand what it takes to build inclusive cultures based on trust?
Yeah, you know, throughout the film, and this didn't happen to halfway through the film, everyone was just talking about the disconnect between the different gangs in the community. And I'm like, there's a big disconnect between the Black community and police officers. Let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. And I had to first reflect on my experience, right? I was that kid who went to school every morning. I pledged allegiance to the flag. I recite the preamble in front of everyone, the Declaration of Independence in front of everyone. I went to baseball games. I sung the national anthem. I'd done everything I was supposed to do as a kid. I passed the Constitution test. I'd never been suspended, never got in trouble, ever. But still had my face pressed down a police car numerous of times. Still had cops put their hands down my pants and check for drugs and been violated. And being touched by a stranger really triggered a lot in me. And first I just thought that it was because I lived on the west side of Chicago. And then when I started interacting with the guys at the boathouse who didn't look like me, and I started going over their house and playing video games in the suburban neighborhood, and I would leave their homes around 8 o'clock at night with my backpack, and police would still pull me over in a nice neighborhood and look through my backpack and ask me if I was stealing. And that's when I realized I was living in a different America. And when I asked those guys, had they ever been pulled over? Had they ever had their hands checked? Have you ever traveled to a regatta and the cashier told your team to come in one at a time? Have you ever been in an elevator and someone held their purse? All these things. And they said no. So when I went to the baseball games, it was hard to sing the same songs that they sing because I was treated different and done everything I was supposed to do. And so my mom taught me, if you see the need, meet the need. And there's two things that scares a Black mom on the west side of Chicago. It's when we in another community and our interaction with the police officer. I dedicated my life to make sure that we bridge the gap between different gang members. I have lived in homes with different gang members. I have lived in recovery homes where it was nothing but different gang members to work with them. And then I felt like, you know what? I need to have a conversation with the Chicago Police Department. It takes a village to raise a child. And everyone in this village, if you're white and you own a restaurant, if you own a store, if you're a teacher, if you're white, if you're a social worker and you're white in this community, they all can admit that Black lives do matter. But there's one group, and it's village that can't. And so I wanted to recast the narrative. And so I invited them out, and I told the guys we were in a unique situation because as a teacher, you will forget some students, but as a student, you'll never forget a teacher. And we were the teachers. And we came out and we showed them how to row. We know that maybe just marching to the police station wouldn't work, but sports unites people. And so we invited them out for a row. And after we rowed, that's when we had a conversation. That's when we asked them to make commitments. And what they learned, not just by one day, but because I asked them to race with us, we had to practice. We had to spend hours beating on our craft. We had to stretch. We had to bring them back to the same water, push out to the same open water where we saw fear in them. And we told them to sit tall. We told them to breathe. We told them we've been here. And they built that trust because their ears are open and we were the teachers. And what they learned was that Preston wears his hoodie and sag his pants every day, but he's one of the best entrepreneurs on the west side of Chicago. They learned that Alvin is not a criminal, but his back was always against the wall and he's a protector and he's loyal to his family. They learned that Malcolm called his son every 10 minutes because there's Black men that love their kids. That scene with the guys and their sons, the cops was actually there watching. They got a different interaction that they have never had. And they saw us and they listened to us and they heard our stories. And I felt like I did my part by opening up those conversations. They made a commitment when they see a kid on the edge, will take them to the boathouse that is free in Chicago. And when George Floyd was murdered, I got a call from those guys. I got messages from those guys that said, I understand the pain of your community. Like they saw a man look into the camera, put his knee on that George Floyd's neck and slowly kill him. And that showed me, and as Preston would say, we just wanted them to walk a mile in our shoes. And when I saw George Floyd's face, I saw my trauma. When they saw George Floyd's face, when the cops saw their face, they saw our face, our kid's face. And I believe that's when I got those calls, when they said, this doesn't make sense. When they sent me pictures saying, we're meeting with the Black faith community in Chicago right now, and we're discussing things. Like for them to be held, they felt like they had to hold themselves accountable to me, even in the midst of my stress or even not sure of inviting them out, really showed me that I just did my part. And that's why I did it. And those who live in Chicago understands that at the end of the day, when they wake up, their kids still have to interact with them. And if we can change their perspective, it's worth it. And like I said, it doesn't change the system, but my way is building bridges through the sport.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashe. Hey, Sean, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Ashe, when I saw that part I was actually kind of rubbed when I saw that part of the video. Not because I didn't understand what you were doing, because I believe that the variables within the systemic equations are what matter the most. And if we can change the variables, then we can change the outcomes. And I also believe wholeheartedly that that when you have something planted in dysfunctional dirt, it's not possible for it to bear fruit. And that we have to uproot that very thing and plant it in fertile ground that's actually meant for all to eat. And the fruit that comes from that law enforcement tree has been poisonous since they were chasing down Black bodies that were enslaved. And you can do one-to-one interactions with law enforcement officers and change their perspective on an individual level. And then they go back to a collective and eat from that same tree. And so we've watched efforts over and over and over again to employ a diverse group of officers, to hire officers from their community. And I'll tell you candidly that if you have to hire officers from the community to have empathy for the community, then you shouldn't be an officer in the first place, because you're sworn to protect and serve all. So if the only capacity you have to protect and serve all is if you are from that community, then there's dysfunction from the genesis of the intentionality of your presence there. And so I do believe it is imperative on a one-to-one level that we are building relationships. I think it is necessary that we acknowledge the shared humanity that we are all sewn together intentionally in this fabric of America. And that each one of our strands are so uniquely tied together that if you pull one, it impacts the whole. So we must continue to find ourselves in shared spaces, seeing each other as the people that we are. That is the only way we move forward. And we have to have honest conversations. That if we see each other as fully human, we can't continue to invest in the systemic things that cause our fellow humans harm. And we have to understand our culpability in those things that have historically caused each other harm. And that is the fruit. If we build better relationships with law enforcement officers on a one-to-one level, and when they interact with a Black or brown young person in the community, they respond differently, that individual does, that's terrific. But if that law enforcement officer goes back to that precinct and doesn't call out their fellow officers for their racist ways and their profiling and the way that they're disproportionately engaging Black and brown communities, then we really haven't gained anything at all. I need people who want to see my humanity and adjust the way they engage with me and engage with the community that I represent. And if they find themselves culpable in acts that are doing harm to the people I love, then understand that your role in that requires you to consider what else could be possible for you in your future, so we can have a shared future that allows all of us to be fully human all of the time.
No, I totally agree with that and love that. And that's the conversation I have with the boys. And one of the things that they'd say is that, you know, because right away people mention Black on Black crime. And what I said was that every day you see Black men working with the Black men in their communities and building programs and mentoring young kids, right? To hold each other accountable. Every day you see white people more and more start to stand up against racism and being anti-racist. What I don't see is a lot of cops standing up against police brutality and marching and calling them out. And that's what we need like never before. And I am so happy when I look back in the 60s when there was so many different movements, when there was the way James Baldwin did things. There was the Black Panthers Party, there was the NAACP, there was King's Movement, there was X Movement, and all necessary to reach those different goals. And I know that for a fact, there's so many things to do to break down the system. But the immediate response for me right away is that Julie is still gonna be here tomorrow. And dude, you need to know my nephew Julius, you know, and that with Black Lives Matter and with NAACP, what everyone else is doing, all those movements, I believe have to work. And I felt like a conversation, even if, you know, my uncle said that even if they don't go back and say anything, I know you go to protests, Arshay, I know you do all these different things, but that's one of the parts that I'm thankful that you did. You did your part. You're trying every angle, and there's still so much work to do. And I hope that you know, I can only brainstorm and do more.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Arshay. What an example you've been and continue to be for all of us. This entire panel is just off the chart. We could talk for another couple of hours, I'm sure, but unfortunately, as I look at the clock, our time is winding down. I want to put out one final question to each of you, and I ask that you take about a minute to answer, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm going to start with Ty. The question is, you know, please share one thing that you would ask the attendees here today to take away from this discussion as we strive to unleash potential for all. Ty?
What I would say, one thing that I would leave with the attendees, the thing I want to leave with you is something that I want you to hold and share with other Black and brown youth that you come encounter with. And that's in having a mindset and letting them know that they should never, absolutely should never give up, that they should continue to work hard, and that they should never give up despite their circumstances. Because the thing is, you can tell them to not lose hope, but when you say never give up, that entails that they're taking action. And you wanna remind them that they need to continually work, continually move on, and never give up. Because eventually, no matter how long it takes, there will be progress and they will make it. But that's so long as they never give up. And so you gotta remind them that. Very cliche, but very true.
Yeah, thank you, Ty. Sarah.
I think about both COVID and I think a renewed look at what Black Lives Matter means and how it impacts us. And what I sort of challenge us is to take, I think, Sean's concept of shared spaces. How do I look at the spaces that I walk through each day, and how do I open those up to more members of my community, especially the young people? And if I can start with that space that means so much to me, whether it's being outdoors, whether it's being on the water rowing, whether it's just feeling safe in my community. If I can figure out how to share that space in a meaningful way, digging at the roots that need to be dug out and planting new life, I think we could get somewhere with this. And I think it has to start with each of us recognizing what we care about and how we create those shared spaces. And I hope you'll all think about that, because I know we each have those in our lives.
Thank you, Sarah. Sean?
Thank you, Loria. There is a ton of people on this tonight that are from a YMCA. And I believe so strongly in the mission and the values of the Y. I believe the YMCA develops all people, especially the young, to their fullest potential in spirit, mind, and body. And what's been instilled inside of me is a byproduct of that. Ys are located everywhere nationally, with great leaders, incredible leaders from the communities that are most marginalized and pushed to the fringes. In this season that we're in, of uprising and awakening, as we finally have gotten quiet enough as a result of the pandemic of COVID to be able to hear the cries from our Black, Indigenous people of color, it is now is an opportunity for Ys nationally to step up and begin to elevate people of color within the cause and to create the space for them to lead in intentional ways so that the communities they reflect can be able to receive the cures that they need that are rooted and grounded in that lived experience. I will also say the Y is a brilliant convener and an absolute gift to communities, having a Y as somebody that can bring other people together from a variety of different agencies and entities, from the for-profit to the nonprofit to the public sector, together to co-labor on possibilities that we can create on behalf of these communities that are suffering, on behalf of my community that's suffering. And so where I get the greatest excitement from the time that we've shared together today, being back in space with many of my Y family members, is to offer this reminder that the power of the Y is bigger than the letter. It's reflective in each and every individual who represents the cause, and our shared power, when given to those who have been impacted, is magnified, not taken away from. And that magnified power given to the hands of people of color can serve as a transformative agent of change throughout our country if we do it together and we do it on purpose. So I'm encouraged. I'm grateful for the beginnings of these convenings, Loria, and I'm honored that I was invited to be a part of this on this evening. Thank you.
And we're glad you're here, Sean. Thank you. Arshay, you have the last word for this panel.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is act beyond yourself. You know, I can live anywhere in New York, but I live in a community was similar to the community I grew up in. Because I believe that when you think of Harriet Tubman, you don't think about her career as a Union spy, but you think of the freedom she represented. When you think of Martin Luther King, you don't think about an educated preacher, but you think about the hope that he brought to the world. Or if you think about Gandhi, you don't think about his job as an attorney, but the peace that he also brought to the world. And I think when you represent something bigger than yourself, than your career, true change happens. So when people see me, they don't say the author, the rower, the chef, but they say, hey, that dude right there in apartment 11J, that's the hope for our community. That's the hope for our neighborhood. When they see my car, they know that that's the hope. Their mothers say the same thing. And I have to be that. I have to be that light. And also make sure that energy and that passion, that freedom, that love, and that peace is contagious. So the other fathers in the building and the aunts, the uncles and grandmothers and young people can represent the same. And also for those who don't look like us, to do the same, to represent something bigger in our career and give our time, our talent, and treasure to places like the Y and opportunities like these sports programs and like rowing programs to move forward to a better future and a better us. And I'm thankful for you guys for having me today.
Arshay, thank you. So guys, just like that, boy, our time is here to be done with this part of the session. What an incredible and thought-provoking conversation we've had here today. I want to thank Arshay for gifting us with this lesson in deconstructing barriers, building trust, forging inclusive cultures. Your story will be told from generation to generation, Arshay. And I want to thank also Sarah and Sean and Ty for your grounding us in these issues in our local area. And as we close our event this evening, we want to remind you all that this is just the beginning of the conversation that we're having. And we want to invite you to continue your own personal learning journey and join us in future conversations to build a more equitable community together. So there's a few things that I wanted to highlight in ways that you can continue to learn, a few calls to action for you. Again, exercising care, self-care, caring for your community. You need some resources to do that. There's a link in this deck which will be placed in the chat box where you can find resources on the YMCA website, specifically through our Social Impact Center. Continue the conversation. Stay for the after show for this discussion. As I mentioned, as soon as we're done here, if you hang around, we're gonna put you into a breakout room where you can have community conversations with others who have spent the last 2 hours with us unpacking systemic racism. So take advantage of that opportunity to continue the conversation. You've seen the film, hopefully. Hopefully you'll take the next step and read Arche's book. So much more there. I would strongly recommend it. I so enjoyed the book and the learnings from the book. Continue on your own journey. There are resources on our website at the Y, anti-racism resources that we will be continuing to expand over time. So we invite you to visit the website. Use your voices. Speak up. Call it out. When you see systemic racist practices, speak up. We need your voices in order to disrupt racism. Going to the next slide. So we are going to continue this learning series. This is the first of 3. The next, I'll give you details on it in just a moment. But if you're interested in joining us as a learning partner, go to our website. Again, we have a link in the chat box. If you want to invest in young people in your community, we have 13 YMCA branches across the greater Seattle area, and we would love to have you volunteer. As we prepare to reopen, hopefully much sooner than later, we would love to have volunteers engage with us in the outdoors, in particular with youth who've been isolated because of COVID-19. They need us the most right now. This is an opportunity to really invest and help unleash potential in young people. Join our collective. If you're an organization, we would love to have you with us. And I've listed some other opportunities. You heard from Sarah about the Play Equity Coalition, an opportunity to join that organization, the George Pocock Rowing Foundation. And we would appreciate very much your feedback. And we will be posting a link for our post-event survey into the chat box, as well as sending that around with the post-event communication. So please take a minute to give us some feedback. We want to ensure that what you need from these conversations, that we're bringing it when we plan and invite panelists. So the next slide. So also, just a reminder, you heard from Arche what happens in the communities when a Y goes away. Our YMCA, even with COVID-19 requiring us to close our doors to normal operation, we remain committed to being there for community. And we've been able to do that largely because of the members who stayed with us. And we're grateful for those members. We could always use more members. We invite you to join us. We invite you to join us as members or to join us as donors. And there's a couple ways that I've outlined here on the screen in which you can donate. And you can also register for our next discussion that's coming up in just a few weeks. But as you'll see, when you invest in the Y, we're able to continue to invest in community, whether it's giving access to youth sports and swim lessons and scholarships from membership. And those membership scholarships include scholarships for foster youth. All of it counts and enables us to show up for community, especially during this unprecedented time. Next. Okay, just reiterating the dates of our next two sessions, August 26th and September the 16th, same time, 4 to 6 p.m. Please join us. We'll have some interesting topics. You have an opportunity, if you take the survey, to influence the topics that we'll be covering in these future sessions. And the last slide, I want to give you instructions on how you can join us for our breakout sessions. We're calling them our community cafe discussions. We want the dialogue to continue. If you stay with us, we're going to automatically put you into a breakout session that will be facilitated, and you'll have an opportunity to share your views, ask questions, and continue the dialogue. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to having you join us for the next session on August 26th. And we look forward to seeing you at the Y. Last but not least, wear a mask, follow the protocols, and be safe for one another. Have a good afternoon.